Video, we're going to learn how to find the inverse of a 3 by 3 matrix, and it is a longer process than a 2 by 2 matrix, but we still need to learn it regardless. So here's a 3 by 3 matrix, and we're going to add to this, just like in our 2 by 2 matrix case, the identity, the multiplicative identity matrix for a 3 by 3. And remember, our identity matrix has all ones along the diagonal and zeros everywhere else. That's called augmenting your matrix. Okay, once we have our matrix augmented, we're going to take a look at our diagonal. And the very first step is going to use the number, the very first number on our diagonal, to zero out all the numbers underneath it. So the very first number we're going to go ahead and zero out is going to be this -1. So what we could do is we could multiply our second row by a 2 and add our first row, because we need to use this number to get rid of this number. We will multiply our middle row by a 2 and add to it the very top row. So let's go ahead and do some side math over here. 2, 0, -1, 1, 0, 0. And when we multiply our middle row by 2, we get a -2, a -2, a 2, a 0, a 2, and a 0. And when we add this, we get a 0, a -2, a 1, a 1, a 2, and a 0. So now we're going to rewrite our new matrix. And remember, the row that we are replacing with our new row value is the row in which the number that we wanted to zero out is. So we will put our new row in and leave all the other existing rows where they are. Alright, so the next number that we need to get rid of, here's our diagonal. The next number, we are using this to zero out all the numbers below. So the next number below our 2 here is the 3. So we need to get rid of that. And how can we get rid of the 3? Well, how about if we multiply this top row by a -3? That'll make that a -6. And if we multiply this bottom row by a 2, that'll make that a 6. So let's go ahead and do that. We would get a -6, a 0, a +3, a -3, a 0, and a 0. And when we multiply this bottom row by a 2, we get a +6, a 4, a 0, a 0, a 0, and a 2. So let's go ahead and add those and see what we come up with. Alright, here's our result. Since we wanted to change this, now we're going to go ahead and replace this bottom row with our new row. And again, we need to rewrite the entire matrix. Let's not be lazy and not write our matrix, because as a teacher, I need to see all of your individual steps. Alrighty, so now it looks like we're finished with column 1. If we take a look at the first number in our diagonal, all the numbers underneath it are 0. So now we're going to move down our diagonal and we're going to zero out all the numbers under the second number. So the only number under here is this 4. So we're going to use this number on our diagonal to get rid of this 4. So I would suggest maybe that we multiply our second row by a 2 to get rid of this 4. So let's go over here and do some side math. When we multiply it out, we get this. We're going to go ahead and copy our bottom row over, and let's go ahead and add and see what we get. We get a 0, a 5, a -1, a 4, and a 2. So let's go ahead and write our new matrix again. And you will notice that we will be done zeroing out all of the elements under our diagonal. So we only have one location left to zero out, and that is the elements on top of our diagonal. Okay, and I forgot to replace this row with my new row. that would be helpful. So we're going to take this row and put it in for our new row over here. Okay, so all of the numbers under our diagonal, all three of these are now zeroed out. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to work up the diagonal starting on the right hand side and zero these numbers out. So we're going to use this number right here to zero these numbers out over here. So the first number we're going to zero out is the one directly above. So I would go ahead and multiply this middle row by a -5. And then we'll add to it this bottom row. So let's go ahead and do some side math again. We have a 0, a 10, a -5, a -5, a -10, and a 0. And we're going to add to that this bottom row. And when we do that, we should get a 0, a 10, a 0, a -6, a -6, and a 2. And we're going to take this row that we just created and we're going to put it in for our middle row. So we're going to create a brand new matrix. We have to be careful with our copying here. If we don't copy things correctly, we could end up with lots of little mistakes. So we have to pay very good attention to detail. Okay, so what's the next number that we need to get rid of? Here's our diagonal, and it looks like since we're working our way up, that's a 0. We have a number right here to get rid of. So maybe we could multiply this top row by a 5 and add this bottom row to it. So let's go ahead and do a little bit of side math here. If we multiply the top row by 5, we get 10, 0, -5, 5, 0, 0. And let's add to it this bottom row. And what do we get when we do that? We get 10, 0, 0, 4, 4, and 2. So let's write our new matrix out. And we're going, and we're going to go ahead and replace, since we were trying to zero out a number in the top row, we're going to replace our top row with the line we created. So 10, 0, 0, 4, 4, 2, 0, 10, 0, -6, -6, 2, 0, 0, 5, -1, 4, and 2. Well, now if we take a look at the numbers in our matrix, it looks like all the numbers below the diagonal are zeros and all the numbers above the diagonals are zeros. If we still had this guy right here, if he was not a 0, we would have to use this number in our diagonal to make this number a 0. Okay, but he is a 0 and we've checked him, he's a 0, we're done there. So the only thing left to do is now we need ones along our diagonal. So we're going to have to divide the top by 10, we'll divide the middle row by 10, and we'll divide our bottom row by 5. And when we do so, what do we get? We get, that's not it. Let's do division. All right, 10 divided by 10 is 1, 0, 0. 4/10 is 2/5. Again, 2/5. 2/10 is 1/5. We'll divide the middle row by 10 and we get 0, 1, 0. -3/5. -3/5. And 1/5. And we'll divide the last row by 5 and we'll get 0, 0, 1. -1/5. 4/5. And 2/5. We have our identity matrix on the left now and our inverse matrix on the right. So our inverse matrix looks like this. Once we reach this point, we are done. We just need to write our inverse matrix out by itself. There we go. Alrighty, so now what I'd like you to do, I'm going to write a problem down, and I would like for you to work through this problem as best you can. And it might take some time. I want you to go ahead and focus and try and work through it as best you can. I would like you to find the inverse of this matrix right here. And I'd like you to use the same process that we used over here. And I'll tell you what the answer is, but I'd like to see the steps in your notes, the steps that you took in your notes. So I'm going to put a little -1 on top to indicate that the inverse of this matrix is this matrix right here. See if you can work through the problem and get this answer. There we go. Have fun.